to the cloud. All right, so before the class, we were talking about the difference between apathy, hatred, and love, specifically putting them on a line and saying that if you are measuring the distance of a thing that you would like to have between that thing and yourself and how much you care about that, the closest you would want to be is love. An active aversion would be hatred, and not caring that it exists at all would be like it doesn't exist. That was the position. And you were asking or commenting about how, well, I'll let you jump in and comment. That's what I was saying. And you were responding.
Well, there was a word choice that you used to describe it, and it sounded odd because it was absence of, as if to have less of something is. No, you said you have to get through apathy, as opposed to apathy being a starting place. Or
meaning that
it was the way you used it that I was commenting on.
Oh, apathy is blindness from my perspective. Apathy is discussed to the point that you block it out and don't see it's there. It is the personification of the unknown to the degree that you don't recognize it as anything relevant. That to me is what's behind apathy. It's you don't even know it exists, and you don't care that you don't know it exists. It's a complete separation of will to interact with it at all, meaning there's no desire, positive or negative. It's just zero. So that would mean that before you can hate something, you have to know it exists. That's a good way to say it. To care about something, you have to know it exists. It's possible to not care about things in any meaningful way that you don't know exists, because apathy is by definition the absence of engagement and care, from that way of defining apathy. So to me, that's kind of how that ties together. You have to know something exists before you can hate it. And before you can love anything, you have to really know what it means to know what that thing is and to hate when that thing is not properly being itself. That's the proper use of hatred, is when something is good and it tries to screw itself up, you should hate that and focus on that to the point that, no, I want to love this thing and keep it what it is and not let it degenerate over time. That needs to be where the disgust is focused. But it's easier to just be disgusted, but that's a new job, right? That's a new thing to do. And with power, the power to decide that, comes the responsibility to make a decision and the consequence of getting it wrong. But that's every thought in our brains. So good luck getting away from that problem. It's just try to figure out different ways to tackle it. But I don't know, does that clear up at least where I was coming from, Tony?
Where you were from was clear. Like, it wasn't
Well, what was interesting about it? Because I didn't see any interested cues from you back.
The word choice was interesting in how, in just the perspectives, and there was a specific word, but I don't remember what the word was, and we weren't recording then.
Yeah. Well, it's funny that you say that, because to me, ideas are two things. Is one, they are destination, and two, they are the finish line. So one is a place, meaning that place exists outside of the method to get there, and it can be approached from many sides. However, the finish line is the things a person needed to understand before understanding that idea was possible. And so from that perspective, to say something is interesting is to be made aware of a different finish line that arrives at the same goal, which is useful, because if you trust that that finish line was a stable path, you can trace it all the way back and find the shared and also separate methods that resonated together to achieve the same goal. So you can map the entire equation they used, if you can understand what they meant, and then put it down on paper and compare it to what you already know. And then you see if any of your gaps are filled in, which is a good way to, like, if somebody reached the same idea you did, and they think the same things are true about it and the same things are false, chances are their work is solid enough to test on your own. And it's worth trying to understand, because anything you can understand is a separate way to measure the same thing, which is the source of all power, really. All right, so I'm gonna turn this around, get the lecture started here. All right, today's topic, I'll shine that right into the light there. Today's topic is logic and emotion, the unification of logic and emotion. So this is different than topics different than ways this conversation might be had, in the sense that the focus is not on which one is better and when. The focus is on proving that both of them are different expressions of the same thing, and that they are not separate at all. And to deny one in favor of the other is to destroy the entire thing. And that's why it is not an either logic or emotion question, as many people seem to have the debate. Is it logic or emotion? Should we be using logic or emotion? That's a better question. Not which one is better. Which one should we be using right now? And even then, that's not a complete answer, because the other half of that answer isn't which one should we be using right now, is which one should we use first right now? Because you need to use both to have any chance at getting a decent decision. You can guess a lot, but if you have no logic, you're not gonna be able to put it together enough. You need to understand enough about your life to make the things you did happen again. That's what your memory does. And your conscious mind chooses which of those things that you think are the best ideas based on what you've seen before. So the more things you can see, well, the more things you can recognize as being different, which means you have more choices if you know the strengths and weaknesses of each and every one of those different differences. You become like Iron Man, who has like 500 Iron Man suits, and they're all built with a very similar structure, but they are built specifically to be very good at specific things, and as a result are not good at other things. So, for example, a hammer is very good at putting a nail in a board. A hammer is very bad at cutting a board in half. Could you do it? Yeah. You go at it long enough, you'll get that board in half. And if your hammer is tiny enough and you spend a long enough time doing it, you might even get a straight cut. But it's not the right tool for the job. And it doesn't matter how masterful you are at using the wrong tool for the wrong job. At best, you will be a successful side act, a successful novelty, a circus sideshow. Look at that guy who can do that thing that's different than all the things we do. But I would never do it that way. Man, neither would I. But look at him go, right? Yeah, that guy. Oh, nothing serious ever comes out of his mouth, though. He's just fun to look at. That's the type of trap that is waiting for that. So today we're going to talk about logic and emotion. So I am going to start with definitions. And I'm going to talk about, so the title is The Unification of Logic and Emotion, the, and of. We've covered those in previous episodes. Unification. So when I talk about unification in this context, I'm speaking specifically to integration, right? It's a merging of. Let's call it a reproduction, offspring, okay? Elements, genetic, intrinsic, functional, become intertwined within each other in much the same way that two parents become intertwined to produce a new individual. And the genetic traits are shared, as well as any outlying traits as well. They're combined into this new thing. So that's one way to look at logic and emotion as in a family structure, right? If you need more of a metaphor, logic is a proper father. And if I'm going to say that, I need to define that. A proper father is someone who teaches their kid how to understand which limits they need to follow, which limits they need to create, and when and how it is appropriate to break through those limits. That is a good father. There's other things they can do, but that's the big one. Good mother, that can be your emotion. A good mother is when to go on an adventure, when to get worked up over something, when to have a fight, when to care about something, and most importantly, how to come back from that the same person that you were or better instead of worse. So a good mother produces insecurity when the child needs insecurity. They're feeling too sure of themselves, and produces security when the child is not living up to its potential in ways which would be easy for it, obviously easy. So the mother teaches emotional navigation, and the father teaches limits and boundaries and ways to manipulate those at will. So now, when I talk about the unification of logic and emotion, metaphorically, what I am talking about is the ability to feel, to want, to desire in ways that are focused towards a singular goal and do not overlap with themselves. The feelings are the motivation, the power. The feelings do not decide the structure of things. Logic does not decide which feelings are important. Logic uses the feelings that are there in ways that are consistent with the past and directs them using the proper setting of judgment, limitation, and boundary so that the emotional energy that is there is put in the right direction. So let me talk about what it means when these are unfocused or one of them is missing. So the lack of unification. Let's talk about the one that I'm familiar with. Well, I'm familiar with both of them from different sides. So let's start with logic. I am Mr. Logic Man, right? I can understand the fathoms of the universe. I can build mental ideas that would make your brain melt. I understand the significance of the cosmos. And if you don't agree with me, I'll cry like a little bitch because emotions are stupid and you're stupid for having them. And I'm smarter than you. That is Logic Man. Logic Man does not understand feelings. He thinks they're dumb. He thinks they get in the way. Why? Because for him, they do. He doesn't understand them enough. He is disgusted by them. He does not explore them. He does not look at them, tries everything he can to not experience them. It is a willful blindness in the name of objectivity, which is a blind subjective ideology, which is biased against emotion. So wrap your head around that one. It is what it hates, but that's the nature of circular reasoning. Your boundary is your hatred. Everything outside of that boundary is unknown. Everything inside it is supposed to be what you love. All right, let's talk about emotion. I am Mr. Emotion. Oh man, I love being alive, don't I? I'm going to go outside and feel the sun on my face. I am going to drink this lemonade and I am going to love my wife and family. And what the hell is that car doing driving on my front lawn? What is the matter with you? Do you think you're better than me? What's the matter with you? I don't care that there was a kid in the road. I just did the sod. Total vulnerability when it comes to being measured at all. No boundaries, no limits. I am Mr. Emotion. I am God. I can go in any direction as far as I want because I feel it is the right direction. Yeah. Neither one of those are very good people to live with. Well, that's true and false. That's true and false. It's true in the sense that both of those people are very limited in their potential. I would say 50% of human potential, roughly speaking. We're logic and emotion, and we balance them. Really, they're the same thing if you get down to it, but we don't see it that way, which means if we separate a thing that is the same into two parts, we lose half of it. That's math. If I have one thing that is one thing, and I use it to make two things, and I split them down the middle, each one is half. So now we've talked about what it means to have too much logic. We talked about what it can mean to have too much emotion. So now I'm going to talk about the potential behind the life of each of those people. And I'm going to do that by speaking of what they can't see. So I'm only going to talk about things that aren't visible to a group that denies one or the other. So it should be pretty easy to keep me honest in that sense. The logic person, okay? Everything that is logic and emotion is potential. It's power. And I talked about what power is. Power is neither negative nor positive. It exists as a neutral force that is pointed in a direction with a plan. And if that plan is wise, that power does good things. And if that plan is immoral or foolish, sometimes it's very difficult to tell those two apart, well, then it's bad. So if we're looking at logic, there's two kinds of people. If you really want to divide them this way, you can divide people any way you want into two kinds of people. That's fun. As long as you're not cheating, you can do that. But you can't say all kinds of people behave all the same ways in the same time. But I can say that between the two types of people, there are a group of people that could be described as relatively well-intentioned when it comes to thinking about others. And then another group of people, which is relatively self-interested when it comes to how much they feel they should do for others. Sure, why not? People who want to go out of their way to help other people, and people who want to do everything for themselves and not be bothered by anyone. We've all met both. So even that, you can see the different potentials. The person who wants to go out and do others might build a business, a philanthropic business. They might use their extra money to fund projects. They would take all of the wealth that they have and be very clever with it and smart and use pattern recognition to build software or companies, which is what happens. If you know art, if you know mathematics, engineering, or science, any of the STEM fields, you have a guaranteed bigger income than anyone who does not. That's because math is hard. It's because logic is hard when you do it well. It's not easy. It can do a lot. Logic will build a computer. Think about what a computer is. It's plastic and metal and magnets operating at microscopic scales independently with components that can swap out from different manufacturers to produce images, movies, sounds, and any sort of program that can be written that speaks a language or 1 or 0. It can bring it to life to the point that you can create Marvel movies which have greater definition and effects than real life. And you can put that in a theater. That is what logic can do. No amount of wishing will build that. So the person who is well-intentioned with logic can build an empire. without ever having a single feeling other than I want to do good. They're smart enough to make it happen because they can understand A plus B plus C to more digits than the next person. And that's what measures where you land in the social hierarchy. How far ahead can you see the right move? How much energy does it take you to get there compared to everyone else? How many moves can you make because you save more energy? If person A over there always makes the right move, but they can only make one move a day. If person B makes the right move 80% of the time and they use their comfort with failure to make 100 moves a day, in one day, that person will do more to change their life than the first person. It would take the first person almost 3 months to catch up with what the other guy does in one day. Just as an example of how that can compound. It's not a small thing, it's exponential. Now, what is this person who is Mr. Logic, who is also well-intentioned? Well, what are they limited by? Well, they think emotion clouds your judgment. And that's a logical fallacy. Because emotion doesn't cloud your judgment. Number one, emotion is your judgment. And number two, emotion, make sure I got this right, because it's a very specific fallacy I'm trying to point out. Let's see, logic is clouded by emotion. Oh yes, and it's circular reasoning, because to say that emotion will cloud judgment is to assume the answer before the question has been brought. It's garbage in, garbage out. You say, because emotion clouds logic, emotion clouds logic, therefore I should not. That's the same thing as making it up. You know, what's more likely is, or what's more accurate, the logical person should say, is emotion can cloud judgment when you do not think after you react. If you do not withhold reaction until after you've thought about it, emotion can and will cloud judgment. That is more accurate to say, but the logical person doesn't understand that separation because it's disgusting. Feelings feel gross. They're not clean. They're icky. You can't put them in a box. They're not ones and zeros. They're not constant. It's anxiety. And all you need to get rid of that anxiety is to say those emotions don't matter at all. And it goes away. Except anytime someone asks you to feel something next to you, then it comes back. But it only comes back for you. It's always there for that other person. They're just standing next to you, reminding you of what you don't have. So what do? You attack their emotionality. And if you're really smart, you can figure out the patterns behind how to win, which is bad for people who are good at logic, because the better you are at logic, the better you were able to figure out how emotion can be abused to cause someone to fall off the rails. So you use your creativity and your ability to deconstruct patterns to prove yourself right all the time. Sometimes you might even get some pretty cool answers. Hey, that person flies off the rails every time I talk about death. So if that person's doing something I don't like, I just have to start a casual conversation about that time my grandmother died. I don't even have to be talking to them, and I know they will leave. Why? Because they're too scared of the topic to stay in the same room with it. Is that my problem? No, not directly. Everyone's got their own issues to deal with. I could say, it's not my fault that this person has a problem with the issue of death. However, when I am using that to mask an insecurity about emotional objectivity, there is not a bigger dick move in the universe than to hold up somebody else's fear faster than they hold up yours to make them go away first. It's a preemptive strike. You're a glass cannon when you're a logic man. You have no validation except that which is proven. Good luck. Now, that isn't to say that it can't be done. Because remember, the topic we're talking about is the unification of logic and emotion. So the journey that I took was the journey of logic man. But it was different in the sense that I didn't care how much I hurt myself to figure out what the right answer was. And that's because I hated myself. I didn't even care enough that I wasn't feeling great, you know? So good and bad, right? I can't feel the full, I couldn't, when I was in this state, I couldn't feel the full experience of human emotion. I couldn't feel the positive sides of things. But you know what else I couldn't feel? Couldn't feel pain. So all those deeply heart-wrenching emotional conclusions that people would have to go through to figure out why they're running scared from all of these different topics and ideas, I could feel the impact. I could feel the change. But using my head as a battering ram was the easiest way to get through that. So that was a weird thing that most of the logic people don't have. That was a derangement that was put into me at a young age by abuse, by being taught that you can't be sure of anything, including and especially what you feel, because that's a weapon that's turned against you. So not only was I given the gift of logic, as it were, but I was given an expert level demonstration on the power of emotion to destroy. And so there was nothing left to hurt. Not until I built it back up. So fine. I just kept running from my feelings. Don't need to have them. Don't need to have them. I'm smart enough. Oh, that person, you can't stop me because I can say these things and make you go away. But there's a limit. And I'm going to show you what that limit is. And we covered this in a different lecture here about the nature of information. This right here, that's a Mobius strip. It's kind of blown up a little bit, but it's a one-dimensional object that's got a half twist in it. One. What's that?
I said that's a cool looking one.
Yeah, I liked the graphic of it, even though it was slightly unmathematical. Mobius strips are Mobius strips. But yes, so any idea that is bound by something, a spectrum, as it were, any idea that is bound by a spectrum, an equal and opposite, love and hate, for example, logic and emotion, for example, fear and trust, for example. If you go and put yourself in the middle of love or hate, and you go in any direction, it's going to hurt. Because your natural lowest energy frequency is where you are right now. To change your perspective about love and hate, you have to change yourself. And you have to do it in specific ways. Most people change themselves in one of two directions: towards or away from, engage or run, fight, flight, mating, fucking, eating, all of it. Away from or towards. Easy enough to be a person if those are your only choices. So if you're logic man and you've decided in your infinite wisdom that emotions are bad, but you've also had it pounded into you that you can't be sure, so you better keep checking because you're wrong all the time, no matter what, and you develop an almost psychotic fixation on precision and objectivity as a coping mechanism to not go insane from having a bad childhood, then you get to keep going. And the way that I discovered logic and emotion were the same thing was I ran so far from my emotions that I ran into them. I went all the way around the damn strip. And I built these crazy logical contraptions of how people act and why they do the things they do and what must be behind it. And I got very good at it. Good to the point that I could have a conversation, and by the third sentence, I would know how that conversation would end. High degrees of accuracy. But that's just a different way of saying I learned what is common about most people when they think about a certain thing. And I learned how to listen to what they were saying so that I could see things from their perspective enough to use what they saw in a different way than they could. And so while I was going down this long and winding road of proving that emotions are just these twisted logical constructs, I proved myself right. There is a mathematical component to emotion. Very predictable. Very predictable. Almost every industry that's earning more than any industry that's earning more than, any $1 million industry right now understands this at a deep level. Any industry earning more than 9 figures influences this on a subtle and public level. There's math behind the emotions. But guess what? The joke was on me. Because once I figured out all the math and said this and this and this and this and this, well, all of a sudden something happened in my body and I started to feel that thing. Well, what the hell is this thing? I never had that before. Oh, wait a minute. Yeah, I did. Oh man, I was having that all the time. Why couldn't I see it? Why didn't it make any sense? It's because I hated it so much, I couldn't look at it and I didn't try to understand it. But because I was running from it, I had to know my enemy so well that I studied it well enough to build a perfect copy of it inside my own brain. It was a damn Trojan horse, which is how the subconscious does things, by the way. It makes you fixate on things you don't understand. If you hate logic, you're going to study logic so you can destroy those bastards. If you hate emotion, you're going to study emotion so you can destroy those bastards. But guess what? You do it too much and you build a copy of it inside yourself. All it takes is one slip up, according to Buddha anyways. All it takes is one. Enlightenment is not optional. Once that last piece kicks into place, you are stuck with the result because you can't lie to yourself about it anymore. Logic is a very good liar. Because logic isn't perfect. But it sounds perfect. It sounds better than emotion, more precise, because it is. But it's equally fallible. So let's talk about, so I made a promise, the unification of logic and emotion, and I've just told some stories so far. So we're gonna rewind. I'm gonna cover some of the slides that I've chosen. And then in, I'd say the last half hour, I'm going to tie together how logic and emotion are actually different representations of the same thing. And this will pair with the episode that I had last time where I had mentioned the neuron pathway lengths of your threat detection systems versus your cognitive reasoning systems. This is a different way of explaining how your emotional sensation from your body is sent through as a signal, decoded by your logic, and stored inside your memory with a memory marker that is the exact feeling you had at the time you made that decision or stored that piece of information. So if a thing is 10 words and reading those words gives you a certain feeling, your memory of feeling is enough to know when each of those words was stressed, which of those words was the most important. It creates almost like a little energy signature, like a file name. If you want to have that thought again, you've got two choices. One is you can build the logic from zero. And a lot of people do that. I do that a lot. I like to build logic from zero because once it's built, then I like to test it with emotion. I like to build it and then test it. So you don't always have time for that, but when you're trying to learn, well, you're not going to do a better job than building it next to what it is. If you get the same building, you did it. If you built it wrong, you figure out why. Either one of those things is better than just seeing it done, or worse, just hearing it's possible. You don't really get the full effect until you do it. It's the same thing as logic and emotion, right? Oh, you're just feeling bad. You're just upset. Well, if you've never accepted what it's like to feel upset, you really can't comment on it. And to be fair, if the other person says they're not stupid and they're being highly emotional, they're not being fair either, because they might not be stupid, but they are acting like a stupid person. And if that's the first interaction this other person has had with them, they're not really giving the other person, who is very logical, very much to go on. In fact, everything they say is asking them to contradict reality. They don't even know them. People don't contradict reality for their families. Not going to do it for some stranger who doesn't like you. Silly approach. Purely emotional approach. It's an entitlement approach. Other people need to understand blank. All of those questions and problems were there before you were born. Nobody needs to understand shit except you. You're late to the party. That's every human. When you get it, you won't need them to get it for you. And if you need someone to get it for you, ask them without a chip on your shoulder. Either way, you're the one asking. Or you get it, and then you don't need anything from anyone else. So remember, beggar or provider, really. And there's a proper time to be both. All right, so let's separate these out here. And these are just some gross generalizations here. So none of these are the Bible. This is just some talking points for me to help get the old creative juices flowing. So I'm going to stay away from the whole left brain, right brain debate. Say whatever you need to know to make you happy with the thing inside your head. Say that that's true about it. It's not going to change the biology in any direction. If it's magic, it's okay. We can still talk about these things. Left brain, right brain doesn't matter for this. So we're talking about logic. I'm going to read some things here. Analytical thought, detail-oriented, perception-oriented, sequential, rational thought, verbal, cautious, planning, math, science, logic, right field vision, right side motor skills. Any of those sound familiar? You might know people who have those. I know that person. That person is me, except I'm a lefty. And I didn't have right field vision. I had extremely pinpoint vision, but that was from high anxiety. Now that's corrected itself. I skipped over right field vision and chose to develop peripheral vision, which is more useful. We'll talk about that in a different episode. But those are all things that are commonly associated with logic. And we already talked about all the things you can do with logic. Now let's talk about the stuff that you can't do with logic, at least from the conventional sense. Intuitive thought, holistic perception, random sequencing, emotional thought, nonverbal, adventurous, impulse, creative, writing, art, imagination, left field vision, left side motor skills. So if I had to make a guess, when I was born, I had a logical brain, and my mom slapped the left-handedness into me, more or less, and knocked out my sequencing. That was the ADHD, random sequencing. I lost my sense of time. I couldn't put stuff in the right order. But because I had all that other logic stuff, it didn't matter. That's how strong logic can be. I could take a random sequence. And I guess what? Any equation that you build reliably from a random sequence is far more precise and far more capable than one that only needs to work in a straight line. So the ability to bring order from random sequencing is the ability to recognize that random is an emotional judgment that's being made when the complexity of something is beyond, it's beyond the level of patience or beyond the level of your tolerance for your own ignorance to explore. So if something becomes too complicated to an emotional person, they will disengage because they become disgusted with their own lack of clarity. Who would want to feel that way? I don't, well, besides me. Who enjoys feeling stupid? Who enjoys feeling like they didn't know enough just then? Now you have to be forward thinking for that to work, which is a logical trait, right? The logic trait is forward thinking. So you say, hey, great, I'm wrong. Another chance to be better. But the impulse, emotional reaction to that is, I'm wrong. Oh no. What have I done? And how dare you? I wasn't ready for this. I'm supposed to be the one to say I was wrong. You can't do it for me. What do you know? Well, I know how your emotions work because I took the damn time to map them out, and you're flailing around like a child and punching everybody. So stop it. Or don't. But if you don't, get out of here. Because I can leave by making my voice loud and saying I don't accept you. Why? Because you're an emotional midget. Get out of here. Or learn to come to peace with yourself and love yourself and spend some damn time learning some logic so you can figure out why all this stuff isn't really so bad. The rest of us. Trying to build something here. Something that doesn't tear itself apart. You know, like a brain that works. It has to work together with itself. A house divided cannot stand. Tony.
I wasn't on camera because I was dealing with one of my sons, but I think that your mom slapping the right brainedness out of you was a joke that should have gotten appreciation.
Thank you. That was a hard joke to learn how to tell. Thank you.
It deserved some credit.
It takes, if nothing else, even if it's not accurate, it took some work to be able to be comfortable with that. Yeah, I find talking about, you know, the abuse and my mom's suicide and, you know, just the lack of guidance, not intentional from my dad, but just he didn't have the tools to deal with me. And when I've analyzed all of the people that I've failed in my life, few people would have been able to help give me the help I needed because I needed so much. And the only person who really cared enough to do it was me. And I worked at it every day, and it took almost 30 years. So I can understand why someone else wouldn't want to get involved, even if it would have only taken them 2 or 3. Still a lot of work. So talking about it, being okay with it, you know, learning to love the parts of you and learning to hate the parts of you enough that you want to change them, but not so much that you don't want to recognize they're there. You know, it's like family. You can hate your family, but you don't give up on them. Not until they're dead. Or they're dead to you. And that's the same inside you. You can hate part of yourself, or you can give up on it and it'll become dead to you. But it's never dead as long as you care enough to bring it back to life. That's the nice thing about this stuff. You can fix it. Next thing we're going to talk about here for the logic is really the source of the logic, and it's the source of the logic emotion debate. So I'm going to bastardize this drawing a little bit because it was close enough to make my point. So we're going to replace empathy with emotion. Call me a liar if that's too big of a stretch for the imagination. But I'm going to say that in this example, empathy, logic, and emotion. Empathy and emotion are the same thing. So we've got here the trust triangle, and it's made up of 3 things. The Tom trust triangle. It's emotion, logic, and authenticity. So look at that shape for a second there. It's a triangle. It's a 2-dimensional shape. Look at each of those dots. Those are points, 0-dimensional objects. We've talked about this before. If you are logic and you do not understand that you are part of a measurement between logic and emotion, and you are comparing logic is better than emotion, You are creating a one-dimensional line that only points back at logic and only sees emotion as one way, in one direction. And that direction is as far as I can get from you. If we take emotion and do the same thing for logic, same exact thing happens. A one-dimensional object, and the proper perspective is away from. So where does authenticity figure? Well, if you want to make an objective observation, you need to remove yourself from the measurement and see both sides. If you are to see both sides, you cannot be on one of them. Period. Or your measurement is skewed at best. Garbage, probably. Because every part of you will want to say that, not me, not I, said the little red hen, right? No, I didn't take the cookie from the jar. Oh, I'm special. I got it right. Those bastards. Yeah, like it doesn't work. It doesn't work. And I pulled up the trust triangle because that is what is missing in both of them. They do not trust things that are not them. You are not one of us. I don't like your way of thinking and it makes me feel bad. You're my enemy. I don't trust you, which means I won't see things your way. Which is why authenticity is key. The emotional person will care how it feels when they lie to themselves. Because you know when you lie to yourself. The human bullshit detector for self-deception is very sensitive. And if you are not playing it straight, you will manifest. Things will make you angry. Certain conversations will be off limits. Certain people will be off limits. Certain religions will be off limits. A lot of boundaries. That's the result of that.
Oh, yes.
But if you are authentic, and you look at that emotion and say, why do I feel that way? And really look at it. And don't stop asking until that goes away. That's how you know you're done. If you are still upset by the same thing you've always been upset by, you do not understand it enough. Unless you are actively in the middle of changing it. And then you are proud of what you're doing. You are not angry. That's the emotional perspective of authenticity. I will not lie to myself because it will be worse. True. We're gonna give kids a spin-off. There we go. But this one we're gonna separate that out. Spin-off, animated spin-off. Yeah, so the emotional person cares when they lie to themselves. They care enough to fix it, which means they will figure out how they are the source of their own bias. And that is how the emotional person makes the trip to objectivity. They have to be real. They have to see it for what it is, which is a strong reaction to a reaction that may not have been fully thought out. So let's look at logic. Well, the logic to authenticity, if you look at the way those arrows go, this is not good news for people who are emotional. Because logic is slow, it's calculating, and it's safe. It's clinical. But it's not immune, because if you see the triangles there, emotion feeds logic, and we're coming to that in the last part of the lecture. So any sort of disgust that you have that you do not recognize will be wrapped in logic, packaged and sold as a good idea. And the more feelings you don't want to say that you have, the more packages you will be delivering every day. And you'll feel very strongly about this. But the logical person who is authentic, well, they can look at themselves and eventually they will say, you know what? Every time somebody talks about religion, I get upset. Why is that? Why do I think other people have the right to judge other people? Maybe that's the thing. And if you look at that logically, you would say everything we do is a judgment of some kind. Where do we go? What do we do? What do we say? How do we dress? What do we eat? If everything is the same and you don't care, you won't move. You need locomotion, a decision of some kind. And if you don't decide what you want, things will decide for you by making you not want them. And your choices will be reduced from infinity down to away, which is why I think that the pronoun discussion is one of the most disgusting things to visit humanity, not because people deserve to be called what they want, but because people are putting such a value on what other people call you. I feel that way about the N-word. I feel that way about every hateful word. People are going to hate you. Grow up. If you're waiting for somebody to love you, start with yourself, because that's the person who's going to make a difference. And when you're done doing that properly, you won't need anyone else to do it for you. So don't attack them for what you can't do, because you're telling them to do a thing for you that you won't do for yourself. That's my opinion. And that is love and hate inside that message, because that's emotion and logic and authenticity. And that's why that message is as old as the Bible. That is the Bible message. Hate your sin. Hate it enough to learn how to forgive it and make it better. Be new. Start over. Be stronger. That's the message of Christianity. But you know where everybody stops? Why do I have to suffer for the things I'm doing wrong? It's different than that. You are suffering from the things you're doing wrong. It's learning how you're suffering and learning why you're doing it and learning to stop hitting yourself. That's an old one, right? Why do you think that's the first thing kids learn on the playground? Stop hitting yourself. Stop hitting yourself. Stop hitting yourself. It's funny because it's true. That's the subconscious helping you out. That's the subconscious asking for a goddamn break. It is both a joke and a cry for help. And learning how to see both sides of it is what you need to stop it from happening at all. So let's so that's the logical journey to authenticity, is the one that says, I am part of this pattern, and here's how. And here's what happens when I remove myself from it. And then the person from logic travels to authenticity. So guess what? You're both real. You're both at the same spot now. You're still traveling in different directions, right? The emotion person had to go this way. The logic person had to go this way. So they're still crossing, right? So when they meet here, anything past here is going to be a divergent path. But you know what you have to do if you want to understand somebody who is on an opposite path than you are? We've already covered this. Reflect, damn it. When you reflect a thing, you get the inverse. If somebody's coming at something from an opposite direction than you, then follow their direction. Because even if you understand it the way you do, if you reflect on it properly, you will get the same view as them. That's a different way of talking about triangulation. That's the kindergarten explanation of triangulation. If you see two lines crossing and you want to know where they're gonna go, but you can only see one of them, draw an imaginary line down the center and hold up a mirror, and you'll get to see exactly where it's going to go if you're going crossing paths that way. So now they can both see the logic and the emotion. So that's great, right? That's an explanation of how to make your logic and emotion play nice. But that's not the same as the thing that I said, which is showing how they're the same thing, right? I'm still in the camp of either or. So now I need to go a layer deeper, and that's what I'm going to use the last half hour to discuss. Actually, lecture's hitting all the points at the right time today. That doesn't usually happen. Usually feel like I'm behind. Maybe I better start screwing off.
I haven't really challenged today.
What's that?
I said I haven't really said much today either.
No, that's fine. That's good. It's not good. It's good. I'm happy for you. I don't know the right social algorithm for this. Abort. That's what it looks like when I misfire, Tony. I keep trying platitudes and none of them fit. So I've got my social algorithm exit algorithm, which is to make a joke about it. Oh crap, I don't know what's going on. Quick, everybody look over here. Hey, now we're smiling, all right. Whew.
I've watched a lot of videos about the power of silence and who can be the most comfortable with silence.
Yeah.
That's going to be a big power.
Depends on the situation, but yeah, I love a good dramatic pause. Really do. All right, so logic and emotion as the same thing. Now we're going to shift gears to biology lesson. So 8 of our 9 Supreme Court justices could listen to this lecture because it's a biology section. It's a joke. That's a joke about political division. It's a joke about being so afraid of appearing weak that you appear stupid instead. Those are things. Logic and emotion as the same thing. So biologically speaking, the parts of you that make you the largest percentage of you are your brain and your nervous system and your senses, which is a different way of saying your brain and your nervous system and everything your nervous system understands. Here we go. You can get your leg cut off. You can get your liver removed. You do a lot of stuff that changes a lot of stuff around. But for the most part, as long as you got your eyes and your ears and your sense of smell and taste, and touch, and a decently functioning brain that doesn't have any hardware defects, factory, I don't know, off the factory spec somehow, injury, etc. Everybody's working with the same hardware. And we've discussed that in previous lectures and how that works and how deeply that goes. But the point is, experiencing the world as a human being with senses is not optional. You have to do it because you're born. And you're already doing it before you can decide you don't want to. There's no way of being petulant about this. It gets you right out the gate. Oh no, I'm new. I'm crying. Feed me. Too late. You're already in it. You're confused and hungry. And these big blobs won't leave you alone. And I'm cold and now I'm warm. And why is liquid coming out of my ass? And what's an ass? I don't know what an ass is yet. I don't know anything. I can't move. My body doesn't work. Ow. Wham. Ha. Keys. Too late. You are a creature of sensation. Sorry. It's terminal. So what does that mean? Well, it means a lot of things. It means a lot of things, especially when you look at the way your memories are encoded. You remember your feelings way more than you remember facts. Oh, we lost Tony. That's all right, he'll be back. You remember feelings way more than you remember facts. And that's because feelings are the way that we sort and store our memories, which is a different way of saying that our sensations in the moment are how we store our memories. So the reason I make that separation is because there's an order of operations here that's happening on some very specific levels. The first one is stimulus. A thing happens. That's first. The second thing that happens is there is a reaction. Okay, that reaction is the sensory marker to that moment. Everything that you smell, learn, taste, anything that feel, anything that was relevant, even a little bit, you can recall that exact feeling / sensation and live in that moment. And I'm going to try and summon one of these. And I'm going to do it through fiction because you can access the memory through fiction. And we've covered that in a different episode, but I really want to go over it here and give you a live example. Well, more examples than me making you laugh when you weren't planning on it. I hijacked your cerebellum. I overrode how much truth you could handle, but I bled it off with laughter by making it funny, which gives you permission to laugh at yourself. Or if you're not ready to laugh at yourself, you can laugh at me, which is the point of the comic. Or laugh at the audience who thinks it's funny. Or complain at the audience who thinks it's funny. Whatever your tolerance with those particular words is at the moment. But the point is, there is a specific sensation associated with each of those decisions. And if you can remember the course of events chronologically, and you can put the appropriate feelings with those events chronologically, you have the power to reproduce the chemicals inside you that were present during that moment, which is why retracing your steps is a good way to remember something. You are reacting to your environment on an unconscious level everywhere you go. So if you had an idea and you don't remember what the idea was, but you remember where you were standing and which direction you were walking and how fast you were going, and even slightly what was on your mind at the time, before or after, if you go back to that spot and you slowly just silently retrace your steps, you will be shocked at the number of times the thing you were trying to remember jumps out. And it is not because you remembered it. It is because you built it from scratch again. But you did it a second time because you had already done it once before and you remembered how. That's how that works. Which is why repetition, practice makes perfect. No, not exactly. Practicing perfect perspective makes perfect. I don't care how many times you dribble a basketball. If you dribble it wrong every time, you fail. If you practice dribbling a basketball enough to learn why it's bouncing wrong when you try to do your killer crossover, you are learning how to understand your body and that basketball well enough to do it right. You're looking for the password. It's got nothing to do with practice and everything to do with precision and decision making, which means you can practice getting better at things you've never done by practicing precision in general, because it will make you better at everything you do, which is why I tried to learn it, because I recognized even at a young age how fucked I was. And the only chance I had, I couldn't learn what I didn't know. I didn't know too many things. It wasn't an option. It would have taken me until I was dead. So I bet everything on the one thing that I felt could close the distance before I died, and that was learning how to learn better. Learning how to learn different, learning how to learn faster, learning what gets in the way of learning, learning how learning is constructed, learning the logic of learning, and then learning the emotional roadblocks that stop learning. and learning the emotional motivators that make learning fun. All of those things were needed. So learning how to learn was really at the key of that, but you never get there if it's not where you're looking. So where you're looking is what you're going to find. Anyways, how logic and emotion are the same thing. I got off track there, sorry. Now I'm back. The reason that logic and emotion are the same thing is that everything you do is derived by reacting to the reaction you have at a certain moment. We established that when you experience a feeling, that's first. You don't get a choice. It happens. A thing happens and your body uses its instruments to record what it knows. This noise was that loud. I felt a rumble about that far away. This thing is moving really fast. It was 27 degrees Celsius outside. Your body knows all those things because it regulates them. It has to, or you die. If you were sick when it happened, it remembers that too. So what happens? You have a reaction to stimuli. Your sensors do stuff. Well, then the next step is where the emotion gets involved to either help or hinder. And that's where logic gets involved, to either help or hinder, because immediately after a reaction, you react to your own reaction. Why? Because it scares you. It was sudden. Whoa, it's different. Now, how you experience that, how you've learned to handle that transition is different for everybody. But it is unexpected and sudden. And the way that that transition is handled determines the split of logic and emotion. Anyone who denies the suddenness of it, the fear behind it, the uncertainty created in that moment, denies their bias, which is the same thing that produces 100% logic man and no emotion, or 100% emotion person, don't you dare question me. So both of those are running from that truth that you are reacting to your reactions. So that's the first hurdle for unifying the unification of logic and emotion, is to recognize that choosing logic or emotion is an emotional reaction. It's a disgust to one or the other. If you didn't care, both would be fine. Both would be preferable to either. There wouldn't be teams. So that's the second thing. How do I react to my own reactions? Well, we covered that in the last episode when we were talking about the difference between intelligence and wisdom, speed and compression. The reason that matters is reacting to a reaction produces more reactions. Think about it like waves, like we did in the other episodes, wave addition. If you have a reaction and it's negative, and you throw a negative reaction at that, you're doing wave addition. You're copying the thing you don't like. Well, there's a reason for that. You're copying it because you don't understand it. If you copy it and you don't look at what you're doing because you're disgusted by the process, you'll keep copying it until you understand it, which is the same thing as people getting into fights with the same people their entire life. It's the same thing behind bigotry and racism that won't change. It just won't move. It only produces itself. So when it comes to the unification of logic and emotion, this is where emotion needs to step in and say, I am having a reaction to my own reaction. And although it feels intuitive to make that reaction go away by destroying it with a stronger reaction, the correct thing to do, if my goal is clarity, is to produce an inverse of that wave to cancel it out. If you hate something, you need to know how to love it just as well. And that's not knowing how to love it, it's knowing when to love it, when it's appropriate, which makes hating it not the only choice, which gives you choice, which is the whole point of doing the exercise in the first place, is to remove the bias. You still get to have the choice but you get to have that choice without the influence of your reaction to your own reactions. You learn how to chill the fuck out after you have feelings. And logic can teach you how to do that very precisely. But once you analyze all of the information, which is logic's job, how many ways can I measure this? How many ways can I break this? What happens if I question this thing that looks suspect? Do I produce paradoxes? Where do they go? Why can't I answer this? This doesn't make sense except when I assume this. Why? Is my assumption wrong, or is everything else that's not my assumption wrong? I need to test that. That's logic's job. And we did that extensively in the last one between intelligence versus wisdom. So we'll skip to the end, where when logic has done its job properly, it can translate its full message into emotional language, which is capable of leaving the body the same way that it came, which is through the threat detection circuits. Which, by the way, if you are being sent a warning and that warning is unanswered, that warning will continue. Help. Why isn't anybody helping? Because you can't respond. But when you can respond and send a message that is logically viewed in simple enough terms that are true from every way that you can imagine. So you have speed compressed into a short bite that does not collapse under its own weight. If I'm getting technical, this would be a third or preferably a fourth dimensional construct when we covered higher dimensional consciousness. Anything over, so your pathways are 3 dimensions, which means they don't experience bandwidth limitations for anything that is 4th dimensional or higher. They're using different space. It's a different concept. They got to go along for the ride. They are a dimension we can't perceive in 3 dimensions, but because the mechanisms operate specifically in those 3 dimensions at that time, you can translate so much more energy back down that path than you would think possible if you take the time to compress it in a way that doesn't unravel itself, which is where the authenticity comes in. You have to be able to do it without triggering your bullshit detectors. You have to do it without lying to yourself. You have to do it without using bad logic. And here's how you'll know when you've done it right. When you're not pissed off. That's how you'll know. Because both logic people and emotional people, when it doesn't go right, they get mad. Because it's harder than it should be from their perspective. So the point is, because you receive information through perspective, because that is sensory in nature, because there is a reactionary component to it, there will always be a specific, not only in construction, but specific in time. You can have the same feeling, sensations, but at different times, and those will be remembered differently. The timestamp matters. It's an extra dimension that lets you create division where division is very small. If I was measuring that in the science terms, it would be doing an integral with a very small dx, and really getting in there, doing it the hard way on paper, not just using the integral and knowing the rules of how they work, but actually going and cutting all the measurements and measuring them one at a time and adding them together. That's what that would be. So when all of that is done, and when it's done honestly, you'll know it works because what you experience translates into what you know without any sort of dissonance. Cognitive dissonance would be the right term for that. If something's still bothering you, something doesn't feel right, something doesn't add up, you haven't done it yet. But it's a spectrum, right? It's not either or. You don't have it or you don't. You can have it in degrees. You only don't have it if you have 0. If you have any of it, you have enough of it to try and learn how to get more, because you can imagine what it's like to have 0. So you can measure what it's like to change it. And if you can change it in one direction, all you have to do is imagine what it would be like to change it in the other direction, and off you go. You just need to make that transition from 0 to not 0. Anything that is not 0 is something you can work with. Which is why when you ask people what they believe, they will tell you what they don't believe. Because they don't want to give you anything to work with. Because they don't give themselves anything to work with. Because their only direction is away, which we covered in this lecture. So are these things true all the time with every person all the time? Absolutely not. Are these things true 100% of the time in very specific situations that can be easily identified if you practice these things enough? 100%. Absolutely. It's not if, it's how, when, and how much. So when I say that logic and emotion are the same thing, I got my last slide here. This was my big reveal. Look at that puzzle. And look at that piece. The think piece.
All right, I'm back.
Is the same.
I've been
Okay,
listening,
brother.
but now I'm watching too.
Okay, so this is the last one. This think piece is the same as this feel piece. They fill the same hole. So that's my closer there. Is if you're trying to separate logic and emotion, you're trying to cut a puzzle piece down the center, not in half. You're cutting it down the center, so you have two identical pieces, and you're only putting one of them where it goes. And then you're like, what the hell is with this extra piece, and why is my puzzle uneven? That was because you cut one of the pieces in half and said it doesn't belong. And if you were an emotional person, you cut the cardboard off the bottom and left the picture. Well, great. So now you have this poster with a hole that's going to get a hole poked through it over time because the picture's only paper thin and the cardboard holds it up. Or you're the other person and you peeled the picture off because it was ugly. It was messing up your brown cardboard that was on every side except for one of it. And you're like, why doesn't my puzzle make sense? Because you tore the damn picture off. That's why. So that's pretty much what I have on the unification of logic and emotion. I actually finished a few minutes ahead of schedule, which is a different way of saying I finished exactly on schedule to leave time for 10 minutes of questions, if there are any.
Well, no questions like usual come to mind. It all fits like an equation.
Yeah, I'm cheating when that happens. All the stuff that I imagine that's crazy and doesn't fit, I don't share that. I know that's nuts. This is only the stuff I've tested. What about you, Patricia? You got anything you're curious about or wanted to comment on or anything really? The floor is open. Doesn't even have to be about the lecture.
Okay.
I prefer it
No.
was. I'm limited here, so beggars can't be choosers.
No, Tom, I like your lecture and I want to listen to it again.
Really? You sat through it and you want to hear it again?
Yeah.
Wow. Well, that's a good compliment. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Cool. All right. See, Tony, what you could learn a thing from Patricia here. Toss that in next time, even if you're lying to me. Give me a false fatherly pride. That would be nice. Way to go, Tom. I'm proud of you, son. Well, don't call me son because that would be weird. You can call me brother because I call you brother all the time. That would be okay. I never really had a brother. I have a sister. You want to be my brother, Tony?
Of course. My brother and
See
sister.
how easy it is to make friends? You just walk in with a couple of nonsense things, some good intentions, a little desire to connect. Bing, bang, boom, gotta go. It helps when the person's already your friend, but that works for strangers too. They're just a little bit more confused. So take exactly what happened here, allow for about 60 seconds of hemming and hawing while they figure out what just happened. Fill that void with some sort of other positive thing like, hey, something nice about you, or hey, I think you could understand this in a way that would help me, or whatever. That's the kindergarten version of how to make friends. Now, that's the program I run. I never really had to upgrade it because it works pretty good. I think most people want to make friends with someone who acts like a kid because they forgot how to do it. So that's why the friendly approach to making, or that's why the kid approach to making friends seems to be one of those hits that never really dies out. It's like the My Sharona. of social
It definitely worked well in college.
Oh, yeah.
And I usually just started with, hi, my name's Tony, what's yours? And then oftentimes you'd actually want to be friends.
Yeah. Nobody says no to that question. How many people say no? Well, there's a few people, but not many. If you're a best man.
But to be fair, I was very, very well known. I actually had monogram post-it notes made with my name and number on them and a rose. And I just used to put a happy face on it and leave it on girls' lunch tables and things like that. So
I was gonna make fun of the significance of the monogram post-it note, but then I realized I didn't have a monogram post-it note and almost nobody else did. So I really don't have any way to compare it to anything else. It's too unique. I can't judge it. There's nothing like it. You can't judge something if it's one of a kind, which is a thing unique people do to avoid scrutiny. That's a flight response to being judged. I'm going to be so unique, you can't put me in a box. It works. It really does. Oh, that's just Tom. I'm sure, Anthony, have you heard a version of that? Oh, that's just Anthony. Some sort of this silent recognition, resignation.
That's usually common for my circles.
Yep. Oh, that's just him being him. Congratulations, you made a box so special that no one can tell you that you should get kicked out, which is what everyone really needs to do. They just have to blend that with a little common sense and humility, and everyone will get along. But humility is a dirty word for people who are logical and emotional, because at the core it means I was wrong, which is a deeply emotional response to I don't want to be wrong. Because if you're wrong, then your fundamental understanding of reality is not right, and then what are you left with? Questions that don't have answers. And if you can either avoid those questions or you can tackle them head on. And I think tackling them head on makes you more capable over time, unless you're about to die. I would say if you're end of life, you've wasted your chance to do better. Or there were chances to do better that you couldn't recognize, or new ways to do better that didn't exist before this moment have just found you. Either way, the timing wasn't right. Enjoy the time you have left. If you got 40 years left, well, then you can make an investment now that will pay off over time. I strongly recommend, because things get expensive at the end of your life, monetarily and spiritually. And the price is the same when you cash out. And that price is paid as soon as you realize you're cashing out. And how much of that balance is left unpaid will be the last thing you experience. So if you're wise, you'll spend so much time paying into that you'll actually have something waiting for you when you're done, instead of a mountain of regret. So live like a humble servant, curious pauper, and die like a king, or live like a king in your own mind and realize you were a pauper the whole time. I'd rather figure out I was a king than to figure out I was a joke, even if the way I got that way was by making jokes. So thanks for listening, guys. Anybody who wants to chime in, feel free to do Joe in the dojo. I'll see you on Thursday, where the topic will be the exact center of this lecture series, which is not an accident. The middle episode, as it were, fear and anxiety, equidistant from every other point that I'm making, just by coincidence. So we will cover that next time. Thanks for watching. That'll be Thursday, starting at 8, running till 9:30 Eastern Standard Time.
All right, we love you, Tom.
See you later.